Polly tossed and turned in her bed until late that night. She couldn't get her mind off Agatha and the torn dress. The frogs down by Spider Creek kept her up with their chirping and croaking. Finally, in the small hours of the morning, Polly nodded off. She woke up just shy of 8 o'clock. She was still tired, and her eyes felt like they had sand in them. Polly washed herself, combed her hair, and got dressed, feeling meaner than a snapping turtle on account of not sleeping well. She trudged downstairs and into the kitchen. Miss Kemp sighed and shook her head when she saw the mood that Polly was in, and hoped her daughter would hold off any complaining until she got to school. But Polly took one look at her toast and eggs and started in. Mother, the toast is just horrid. It's all burned and jug-a-rum. How on earth could a bullfrog have gotten into the house? Mrs. Kemp wondered. Why, it sounded like it was right in the kitchen. Jug-a-rum. Miss Kemp's eyes lit on Polly. The girl was sitting bolt upright with one hand at her throat. She looked like she was about to scream, but the sound that came out was jug-a-rum. Polly's mother shook her head in exasperation. You can stop that right now, young lady, she said. Making frog sounds isn't going to get you out of school today. You've told me you were sick too many other times, and then jug-a-rum, jug-a-rum. That's enough, Polly. Jug-a-rum. All right, be a frog if you want to, but get that breakfast into you and be off. Before she knew it, Polly was standing on the front steps with her coat on and her school books under her arm. Her mother slammed the door behind her. Polly shuffled down the road to the school, scared to death by the croaks that had come from her mouth when she tried to speak. Once or twice, she tried talking to herself, unable to believe what had happened. Jug-a-rum. When she was halfway to school, she heard running footsteps on the path behind her. She turned around, and there was Adam Fisk. She hoped that he'd just pass on by without saying anything, but he came up behind her, and he slowed to a walk. Good morning, Polly, said Adam. After today, I've gotten a few days off before final tests start. What do you think of that? Polly didn't like it at all. The older students were lucky. She still had to go to school every day. Jug-a-rum. You don't have to get sassy with me, Polly Kemp, Adam told her. Jug-a-rum. Adam was stopping walking and looking carefully at Polly. Hey, you do that real good. It sounds just like a bullfrog. Jug-a-rum. I've got better things to do than to talk to someone who only makes frog sounds, said Adam. Bye, Froggy, and he trotted off down the road. When Polly reached the school playground, the first thing she saw was Agatha Benthorn standing near the swings, whispering something into Eunice Ingersoll's ear. Eunice pointed, and Agatha turned about. She made an ugly face at Polly and stuck out her tongue, and then she and Eunice linked arms and walked away with their heads high, leaving Polly behind, unable to say a word. It wasn't fair, Polly thought miserably. She hadn't intended to say anything peevish or nasty. Instead, she wanted to tell Agatha how sorry she was about tearing the dress. But all she could do was croak, and the two girls heard her, and they'd laugh. Polly didn't think she could stand that. For once you kept your mouth shut, she heard someone say, instead of letting it get you into trouble. Good for you, Polly. It was Lenora Wickstaff. Leland was with her. Polly tried to speak. Jug-a-rum. You sounded just like a bullfrog, said Leland, with a big grin on his face. Where'd you learn to do that, Polly? Can you teach me? Jug-a-rum, jug-a-rum. Leland's talking to you, Polly, said Lenora. Can't you do anything but croak at him? Jug-a-rum. Leland and Lenora looked at another in astonishment. They led Polly to a quiet corner of the playground. Say something, Polly, Lenora ordered in a hushed voice. Like, what's your name? Jug-a-rum. Come on, Polly, said Leland. Stop fooling around. She's not fooling, you dumb lummox, Lenora told her brother. Nobody fools with tears running down their face. Polly, what happened? Jug-a-rum. Here, try your eyes. Lenora took a handkerchief from her pocket and started scrubbing Polly's face. When the school doors opened, Lenora and Leland stood close beside Polly and pretended to be talking to her and listening to her. Polly got to her room just as the teacher, Miss Marasco, was about to call roll. Robert Appleton? Here. Agatha Benthorn? Here. Polly gazed miserably at the floor. Soon her name would be called, and she'd have to answer. Already she could imagine the whole class laughing at her. Eunice Ingersoll? Here. Polly Kemp? Polly waved her hand frantically. Miss Marasco just had to see she was in her seat. Maybe the teacher wouldn't ask. Polly Kemp? Miss Marasco looked up from the class list on her hand. Polly, she said, the rule is clear. To be marked present, you must answer here when I call your name. Silently, Polly nodded her head. A boy chuckled, and Agatha Benthorn leaned towards Eunice Ingersoll. First time I ever saw Polly Kemp without any words to say, Agatha told Eunice. Polly heard the remark. She was so outraged she didn't even think about croaking. Here, said Polly loudly. Miss Marasco nodded and went with the roll call. Polly couldn't believe what happened. Somehow she could talk again. For the whole morning, Polly didn't say much, and what she did say was in a whisper, but the croaking just seemed to have completely disappeared. Just before lunch, she was able to give Miss Marasco the capitals of all the states with only 2 mistakes. On the playground, the boys were hogging both swings and even the seesaw. It made Polly angry. She was about to shout at them, to give the girls a turn, when Leland Wigstaff grabbed her arm and led her to a corner of the schoolyard where Lenora was sitting. You look meaner than a snake with a toothache, Polly, Leland said, but don't start in yelling. Maybe shouting is what made you lose your voice in the first place. I'm just glad it's over, said Lenora. When did the croaking start, Polly? This morning, Polly replied. I was eating breakfast, and I was right in the middle of complaining to my mother about how she burned the toast when... If I complained to my ma about burnt toast, she'd whack my backside, Leland told her. You just give your voice a rest, Polly, said Lenora. Miss Marasco said it was real nice, the way you've been so polite all morning. She told me she'd never seen you like this before. Polly smiled. She liked hearing that Miss Marasco was pleased with her. After lunch was arithmetic class. It was Polly's best subject. Agatha Benthorn was sent to the blackboard to do multiplication problem. Her hand shook as she wrote the numbers. Everyone in Coventry knew Agatha didn't know beans about arithmetic. 7 times 7 is 77, Agatha mumbled to herself. Polly's hand shot up. 7 times 7 isn't 77, she called out. It's 49. Quite right, said Miss Marasco. Someone else had better finish up, Agatha. Agatha slumped back to her seat. Polly leaned over and patted her shoulder comfortingly. Don't feel bad, Polly said. Anybody could make... Don't you say a word, you urchin, Agatha whispered. Maybe you knew your numbers, but you're trash, and that's all you'll ever be. Well, that tore it. Nobody talked to Polly that way. Agatha Benthorn, you are dumb, shouted Polly, not caring who heard her. You ain't got sense in that, Jug-a-rum. Everyone in the class looked around to see where the frog was. Jug-a-rum, Jug-a-rum. It was happening again. It's Polly Kemp, howled a skinny boy in the back row. Polly sounds like a bullfrog. The other pupils were pointing their fingers at her and laughing. Polly couldn't stand it. Jug-a-rum, she shouted. The laughing and jeering got louder. Stop it at once. At the sound of Miss Marasco's voice, the students became as still as stones. Polly, are you croaking like that on purpose? The teacher asked. Polly shook her head. Jug-a-rum. Come to my desk, Polly, said Miss Marasco. Moments later, Polly was trudging along the path to her house. When she arrived, she gave her mother the note Miss Marasco had written. Mrs. Kemp read the note and then tried to ask Polly some questions, but the only answer she got was, Jug-a-rum. Mrs. Kemp gave Polly some hot tea and then sent her to bed, promising to call the doctor if she wasn't better in the morning. Lying there with a thick quilt wrapped around her, Polly tried to figure out what was happening to her. She thought about it for nearly an hour without any success at all. I don't want to sound like a bullfrog all the time, she whimpered. She sat up and stared at her reflection in the mirror on the far wall. She'd said real words. Mother, she called. Mother, the bullfrog sound is gone. I can talk again. Mrs. Kemp came a-running. It must have been my tea, she said. Strong tea is good for whatever ails a body. For the rest of the day, Polly talked a blue streak, the words tumbling from her mouth. After school, the Wigstaff twins came by to see how she was feeling. The croaking went away, she told them. I'm cured. Yeah, said Lenora doubtfully. Maybe. No maybe about it, Polly answered. Listen to me talk. Polly, you were croaking when you came to school, said Lenora, and then you could talk again, and then it was back to the croaking. But now it's all gone, said Polly. I'm all better. The croaking happened twice, said Leland. Who's to say it won't start up again just when you least expect it? Leland was right. The croaking might begin again. Oh, Polly groaned. And there's another problem, said Leland. You best tell it, Lenora. You're the one who heard it. What problem? Asked Polly. Well, Lenora began, I overheard Agatha and Eunice talking together after school. They're up to something, Polly, something to do with you. They were saying how they were going to do something to get even with you for tearing Agatha's dress and for what you said to her in school. It was the end of Polly's happy feeling. The croaking might come back at any time, and on top of that, Agatha and Eunice were plotting against her. That night in bed, Polly lay sobbing into her pillow. Suddenly she shifted her head, listening. She'd often heard the sound before, but then it had come off in the direction of Spider Crick. Now, however, it was right outside her window. Chirp-a-chirp, chirp-a-chirp, jug-a-rum. Frogs, thousands of them, and from the sound they were just outside in the yard, each one talking to her in its own way. All that long night, Polly tossed and turned and dreamed of big, slimy bullfrogs climbing in through her window and snuggling their wet bodies next to hers under the blanket.